Welcome to Coaching Revealed. I'm one of your hosts, Austin Matzelle. In this episode, we interview Kavita Govindjee, a coach, facilitator, and researcher who's earned her research master's degree from Nelson Mandela University to explore the impact of coaching on self-leadership. In today's conversation, we explore what self-leadership is as a field of research and a skill set, and how coaches can grow this muscle. Kavita Govindjee is the founder of Culpa and is committed to empowering individuals and promoting growth. She leverages her extensive experience in development and executive education to provide leadership and executive coaching for leaders and entrepreneurs, as well as designing and facilitating workshops for corporate and community groups. Along with her research master's from Nelson Mandela University, she's also a facilitator and Enneagram practitioner. Kavita is a contracted lecturer on the MBA program at Nelson Mandela University's Business School. By applying an integral coaching approach, Kavita facilitates a process for leaders to explore not only their inner world, but also how they influence and interact with external systems and cultures. Addressing the whole person, including their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, she enables clients to fully harness their capacity for growth by supporting them to uncover their authentic leadership style, build resilience, and cultivate deeper self-awareness to lead with confidence and purpose. In this episode, Kavita shares the research base for self-leadership, which includes social cognitive theory, how internal and external factors interact, self-regulation theory, how we utilize self-observation and discipline in our goal achievement, and social learning theory, how we learn from observing others. As we discuss these theories, Kavita explains the research on self-leadership development strategies, including behavior-focused strategies, natural reward strategies, and constructive thought strategies. Kavita discusses these strategies and the data from her qualitative study with coaches in South Africa. With developing self-leadership, we discuss barriers such as a lack of awareness and personality factors, with research indicating that self-leadership is learnable rather than an inherited trait. The episode ends with conversation around a self-leadership coaching model Kavita developed called the AAA model: aim, actuality, action. Similar to the GROW model, this model emphasizes exploring the why behind goals and spending significant time in the action phase to ensure clients incorporate pleasant aspects, identify motivators, and plan rewards. In closing, Kavita emphasizes that self-leadership is a skill everyone needs, and coaching may be one of the most powerful ways to develop it. Thank you for tuning into Coaching Revealed. And now, our conversation with Kavita Govindjee. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Coaching Revealed. And we are with Kavita Govindjee today. And we're going to be talking about self-leadership and Kavita's research and work in this space. Kavita, it's so good to have you in the studio with us today.
Thank you, Austin. It's such an honor and privilege to be here. And thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And so, we're going to get a lot into this world of self-leadership and the research that is in this space and the way that this idea of self-leadership can impact coaching. First off, I would love to know what led to you pursuing a research master's as a coach.
So I wanted to pursue a master's degree because I love studying. And after doing a number of short courses, I decided that it was now time to upgrade my qualifications. So I ended up pursuing an MCOM in industrial psychology with only research. If I had chosen to follow the coursework path, it would have meant that I have to first do an honors degree in industrial psychology and then only pursue my master's. So I decided to rather just go the research route and have not looked back on that at all. I also felt that the master's was the next logical step for me, and I believe that it would enhance my career prospects, especially in the educational space in which I operate. I am a facilitator, but I felt that having a master's degree would help me to get one step closer to becoming a subject matter expert.
Okay, that's wonderful. And so you went for the research master's specifically, and a lot of people at times when they're going into graduate school, where they start can be a slightly different place from where they finish. What was your original research concept and what did you end up researching? What was that journey like as you were going through and getting this degree from the university?
Well, I wanted to pursue my master's for many years, and it took a while before I registered because for me, I wanted it to be something that would be meaningful to me and my career. And I started exploring this idea of studying early in 2021 during the COVID pandemic, where most countries were in lockdown and leaders as well as staff at all levels were working remotely. And that got me thinking about how individuals in general lead themselves in a remote environment. There aren't any colleagues, there aren't any leaders around them. They were on their own working remotely. So I was interested to learn what sort of strategies employees used to lead themselves and how they obtained these skills. So I had to narrow it down a bit and decided that I was going to focus on how female leaders practice self-leadership in a remote working environment. And that was my original topic that I submitted to the university. But then when I met with my supervisor, he started challenging my thinking. And he asked me, he said, Kavita, you're a coach, aren't you? So I said, yes. So he said, then how come your research is not focused on coaching? And it's not that I didn't think about using coaching as a topic, but I think at that time I thought that the research was still rather limited and it would make it a bit difficult for me to do my master's. But he assured me that there should be enough to write a master's dissertation. The topic of my research then changed to the contribution of generic coaching to self-leadership. Now, generic coaching is not a new niche. It merely refers to any niche of coaching, be it leadership, life, business, health, career, etc. So the focus was on how does coaching, any coaching, lead to self-leadership.
Yeah. And so let's dive a little bit into that research that exists on self-leadership. For the research that you did specifically, what are some of the theories that underpin the concept of self-leadership from the academic sense?
So some of the theories that underpin self-leadership, I looked at social cognitive theory, and this is Bandura's theory about the internal and external factors that interact together and show how they influence each other. The second one was the self-regulation theory, and that relates to how we focus our actions towards our goals, firstly through observing ourselves, self-judgment, and how we respond. So this is more related to how we discipline ourselves in order to achieve our goals. And then the third theory is the social learning theory. And this is where individuals are able to guide their thoughts, their behavior, and motivation within their social context. So, for example, if we observe coaches who are getting the best results for their clients, we may learn to do the same. We notice their presence, we notice how they ask questions, and the space that they provide for their clients. As we're observing them, we're learning. And then that helps us to improve our own practice. So that's what the social learning theory is about. And, if we also look at the researchers who influenced this field, we can also go way back to 1986. The seminal authors of self-leadership are Mans, Neck, and Houghton, and they describe the self-leadership strategies that I've used in my research.
So with these three primary theories you've mentioned, we have the social cognitive theory, the self-regulation theory, and the social learning theory. What is the interplay between them in terms of understanding how maybe an individual has their own self-leadership, or how an individual coach may be working with a client's self-leadership? One of the things I heard is the self-regulation theory is a little bit more maybe control-based and a little more rigid, whereas social learning theory seems a little bit more, you see someone doing something and then you are able to improve your process. So do people work with the different theories better sometimes? The theory might be easier for one individual and harder for another. Like I may be more inclined to social learning theory, explaining how to best self-lead myself.
So I think it probably is different for everybody, but we do try and use all these three with self-leadership. We want to be able to regulate ourselves in a way that we are able to do those very difficult tasks and discipline ourselves in order to achieve those goals that we had set for ourselves. So we know that when we do have our mind set to something, it's very easy to just fall back into old patterns. By having these regulated ways of getting things done, it helps us to get closer to achieving that goal. With the social learning theory, also, that's something that if people are observing others do a particular task, it may inspire them to do it in a similar way, or even just get things done. So I think there's definitely an interaction between all these theories that will help to promote self-leadership within individuals, just help them to develop these self-leadership skills.
So the integration is very, very paramount and very key within this process.
Mm-hmm.
With these three theories underpinning the work and the research, did you have a specific definition of self-leadership that you utilized in your research and in your dissertation?
So I looked at self-leadership as a more of a non-traditional perspective where individuals assert influence upon themselves instead of others. So of course, there's a difference between self-leadership and leadership. And I think most of us know that leadership is about influencing others, while self-leadership is about influencing yourself. It's more regarded as a path towards leadership and something that leaders also need to continue to practice. I think what I'm trying to say here is that potential leaders and others can practice self-leadership, but that doesn't mean that once they become a leader, they should only focus on leading others. They still have to continue leading themselves so that they can then lead others more effectively. And often there's some confusion between the difference in self-management and self-leadership. And although the two concepts are related, they differ in the way in which tasks should be completed. Self-leadership focuses more on the what and the why of the task, but self-management focuses on the how of the task. So what self-leadership wants to build in is more purpose and meaning into the task. Why are we actually doing that task? And I think that once we understand that and really want to do it, we actually then can get it done. So it is more meaningful in that sense.
Yeah, it sounds very aligned to the individual's intrinsic motivation and their core values to be analyzing the what and the why, as opposed to just the operational functionality of how they achieve things. As you're looking within the field of self-leadership, are there specific strategies? Are there specific methodologies in which individuals are able to be developing their sense of self-leadership and their ability to be aligned in that way?
Ready to advance your coaching practice? Join the Institute of Coaching and tap into the world's leading resource for coaching science and professional development. With over 4,000 members across 130 countries, the IOC offers invaluable networking opportunities with an elite global coaching community and innovative learning to broaden your knowledge and keep you at the forefront of coaching best practices. Engage in cutting-edge learning events with world-renowned coaching scholars, from webinars and seminars to discussion groups, research projects, and more. Try any membership free for 30 days. Use promo code IOC Podcast and visit instituteofcoaching.org/join to get started.
So the experts have identified 3 strategies that can be used to develop self-leadership. The first one being behavior-focused strategies. And this is more aimed at managing and enhancing behaviors that can lead to task completion. So these strategies, the behavior-focused ones, can help individuals become more aware of how they behave, especially when they're dealing with tasks that are necessary but unpleasant. Even as coaches, sometimes we've got to do these unpleasant tasks such as admin. The behavior-focused strategies help us to deal with them and do it in a way that makes it feel more positive. So behavior-focused strategies encourage the positive actions that support us to achieve our goals. On the other hand, it also reduces the negative behaviors that pulls them away from these desired results. And some of these strategies that fall under behavior-focused strategies include self-observation, self-goal setting, self-reward, self-punishment, and self-cueing. And there was a participant that gave me a lovely example of self-cueing. She said that every time she wanted to have a cup of tea, she was waiting for the water in the kettle to boil. And while she was waiting, she would practice her breathing exercises. So just the cue of that kettle reminded her, it's now time to do my breathing exercises. So it was a lovely way for her to just keep in check with what she needed to do to achieve that goal of hers, to continue breathing throughout the day. Then the second strategy is the natural reward strategies. And these assist individuals to focus on tasks that are naturally motivating, really wanting to make them more enjoyable. And the other part of this is that to stay motivated, individuals have to focus on the rewarding aspects of the tasks rather than the unpleasant aspects of the task. So a participant said that, they had to go and dig a hole, something that he was not motivated to do at all. So to ensure that he completed the job, he kept his focus on, okay, when I'm done with this, I'm going to go and sit at the TV, I'm going to drink my coffee and eat my chips. And this was his incentive that helped him to go and complete the task. So he inserted this motivational aspect into the task that he needed to complete, right? And then the third one is constructive thought strategies. And this involves replacing the negative and dysfunctional thinking patterns with more constructive and positive thoughts, as well as using mental imagery and positive self-talk. I remember my participants sharing that they often had that voice in their head saying, oh, I'm not good enough, when they started that leadership position. And they also shared how that coaching process helped them to reframe this and offered them tools to help change these negative beliefs that they had into positive beliefs, or otherwise positive self-talk. And that helped them to get through every day as they were starting off as a new leader.
In this space, when you're talking about these different methods, the behavior focused, it brings up like ideas such as habit stacking, where you have one thing that you're almost waiting for and you're using something to fill up that time in a way that's more positive. And I think a lot of the overall sentiment of the strategies comes down to the awareness that the individual has and their ability to self-lead and look at, this is what I'm doing with my day, this is what I'm doing with my time, and how am I looking at the big picture and the small picture, so the longer term and the exact moment that I'm in, and how can I make the most of this for myself. The presence seems like a pretty important and valuable component there. Are any of the individuals that you've worked with within your research, do they talk about their presence or their attention and components like that?
Definitely. I mean, one of the strategies includes self-observation. And I think a huge outcome of coaching is raising self-awareness. And this is something that all the participants brought up, that it definitely did improve their self-awareness. They became more aware of how they were behaving, what it was they were doing. In terms of self-goal setting, the coaching process starts off by setting a goal. So that is something that they would do, in the coaching process, and maybe even prior to that. We know January calls for setting new goals. So sometimes it's there, people know about it. So they focus on goal setting, rewarding themselves as well. I think that it's something that many of them have practiced. But I know of certain clients, not necessarily the participants, certain of my clients who fail to reward themselves. Often I'll say, okay, so you've achieved that goal of yours. How have you rewarded yourself? And often they'll say, oh, no, I don't have time for that. You do it and then it's time to move to the next thing. So it's just to bring up that awareness for them that this also helps to motivate them and move on to the next goal. Yeah, but definitely it does build those habits. The more they do it, of course, even just small little increments help them to sustain those habits and build it into something bigger.
And that awareness piece seems so crucial to recognizing that importance and that need of, you do need to also recognize the achievements that you've made and reward yourself at times, because I think so many of us can fall into that trap of, I'm just going to achieve, and then once I've done that, I'm going to achieve the next thing and then the next thing, as opposed to achieving and rewarding yourself or just appreciating what you've done before immediately jumping onto the next task. I do really want to ask, I'm very curious. So as someone who has done all this research and work in the space of self-leadership, how has your relationship with yourself changed since you started this research and since you have finished this dissertation?
Yeah. So definitely, it improved my understanding of self-leadership and the way I lead myself. I thought that I was quite a good self-leader. The literature has shown me that there are different ways of looking at self-leadership. And, just to give you an example of how I integrated self-leadership into my research process, I started off by just having this goal of doing a master's degree. So that was the goal setting that I had done at the beginning of my master's. And for me, it was important that I complete the master's, I graduate, and I walk down that stage and receive my degree. And that was the image that I kept in my mind all that time, So that's the visual imagery that I had captured from the start as well. I had to also look for the natural reward strategies within this. So what I had done was that I decided to find certain things that would make me enjoy the process more. Research is not easy. It's a lonely process. So I found it in music. I decided that I'm going to sit and play my music. And I realized that that was something that really kept me going. There were some nights that I would plan to only work for 2 hours, but because I was sitting and enjoying the music so much, I ended up sitting for even longer than expected. Of course, it was great because I got so much more work done, even though I hadn't planned it. But I felt like I really accomplished something by doing that. And also just that inner voice that I had to continuously keep a check on that, making sure that I wasn't thinking negative thoughts around the research and my work as such. It was the first time I was doing any research as such, and I wasn't sure whether I was doing it right or wrong or what I needed to do. And it was a big learning curve for me. Through this process, I had to keep a check on my thinking. What were those beliefs that I had when I had just started? I don't know how to do research. I need to figure this all out. But it kept me going, and I kept thinking about what the end goal is and what it is that I needed to say to myself to get me through this 2 years that I was working on this. So yeah, there were a couple of things, but I think what really stood out for me was just to be able to make the process enjoyable. And that's part of the natural reward strategy. And that really got me through it. And even now, when I listen to those songs, it just takes me back to those days when I was sitting and doing my research. Also at that time, it was a difficult time for me because we were renovating our house at the same time and we were living in temporary accommodation. So I was out of my normal environment and living in a very different environment. So I had to learn to be more adaptable and figure out what is going to work best for me. And I think there's nothing like doing a research master's that teaches you to be more of a self-leader. Because it's not like when you're sitting in class with classmates, you can share ideas. And if you're not sure about something, you can always ask. This was a lonely process. It's just myself, my research, and my supervisor. And that was it. So the self-leadership was very important for me at that time. And up to now, I still continue practicing it because I work from home. I'm a coach and I work remotely most of the time. So I'm on my own a lot. So it's having to keep my thoughts in check and making sure that I wake up every morning, show up for work, do what's necessary, even those unpleasant tasks like admin sometimes, and get the things done.
It is something that is so important, talking about the enjoyment that you're experiencing in this process, whether it is a hard process or the factors coming in from the outside that can add challenge, such as your living conditions aren't what you're accustomed to. And that has such a big impact on your daily function when you're having to regulate how you feel because you're not in your usual or preferred environment. I think here I would love to know a little bit more about, for anyone listening in, through the strategies of self-leadership. We've touched on some of these components, such as the visualizations and building out some natural reward strategies for someone who had, some sort of big task coming up. Maybe it's also a research master's, or maybe something else like building up a business or developing some sort of project, whatever that may be. What type of roadmap or checklist might you suggest they consider when they're looking at achieving this big thing, if they were to utilize a self-leadership backed strategy, what types of things should they be considering as they are embarking on a new endeavor?
Mm. I think firstly, Austin, definitely, they've got this goal in mind. The most important thing is to understand why is it that they want this. Let's say starting a new business. Why do they want to start a new business? What's important about that for them? Because once they really understand the why of that, when they are in a difficult situation or they feel like giving up, and believe me, there will be times when you do feel like you want to just give up and do something different. It's nice for them to just go back to that why. Build that meaning and purpose into the goal from the start. Then start observing yourself. As you're doing this every day, just see what is going on. Check in with yourself. How are you feeling physically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually? What are those things that are making you move forward today, or what's going to get you through that day? And then look at what are those things at the end that you're hoping to achieve from this. If you have a business, what's that going to give you? What will be the reward for you in that? What are those things that are going to get you to work on your business as well, to make sure that your business is growing? What are the things that you're going to use to cue, whether you're going to be learning to train yourself or learn from others, whatever it is, figure out what are those things that you want to have to be able to grow within that role of yours. So that's just looking mostly at the behavior-focused strategies, and then look at those things that make it more enjoyable for you. If you really don't like doing admin, see if you can outsource that. Maybe AI can do it for you, who knows? So there are various options available so that you can make sure that you don't feel demotivated at any time. I think just enjoy the experience. While you're there, remember what it is that you want to achieve by doing this, and keep going to get what you want to.
I think it's a really, really good roadmap to get people kind of embarked on their journeys, utilizing the self-leadership as a backing. So I would love to talk a little bit more about the research that you did, and also about some of the coaching components. I know that you worked with coaches in South Africa, and you were having them come in and work with clients and gathering research and data from them. Can you share a little bit more about what that study design was?
It was a qualitative study that I used, and I focused on interpretative and phenomenological analysis. So it was really a very rich, deep, exploratory study. And just by listening to the interviews and going through that with the participants, it really helped me to get a understanding of their lived experiences of coaching. I have been coached personally for many, many hours as part of my training, as well as just sporadically as I needed it. But I think hearing the experiences of others really helped me to understand coaching a bit deeper, what they were going through, what the coaching process entailed, the different tools that they had learned, how they had set their goals, etc. All of that just helped to get their point of view and their perspective on what coaching meant for them and what the outcomes of coaching was for them. I think often we hear about the outcomes of coaching in research, not too much of the process, but by hearing these interviews, it helped me to get a better understanding also of the process that they had gone through, because they gave me a good idea of the process that was followed with them. And by listening to them, I think also you could hear there was a definite model that was being used within that to get through that process.
So as you were analyzing this data and developing a better understanding of the process, specifically seeking these positive outcomes from the coaching dynamics, what are some of the coaching dynamics or factors within coaching sectors that can positively impact a coach-client relationship to help the clients gain these self-leadership skills?
I think the coach-client relationship is really a very important one. And I realized that within my research, that was also something that had come up. They really spoke about the relationship that they had with the coach and how important it was for them. Some of them didn't want to see another coach. The one said even during COVID, he didn't want to meet with the coach online. He really wanted to only have face-to-face sessions. So he even stopped the coaching until he could go back to his own coach again. And he spoke about how important it was in the sense that it was like going to speak to an aunt, one of those very kind aunts, just to make it easier for him to be more vulnerable and open to the whole coaching process. The relationship plays a significant role in making sure that the outcomes for the client are achieved.
And in this space, with the outcomes being boosting self-leadership of individuals, what did you find within your research being effective tools that coaches had or effective techniques that coaches could use to help their clients on this journey of self-leadership? Because it certainly sounds like there was some heavily effective work being done here, referring to them or feeling as if it's almost a trusted familial relationship. That's a very deep and very important bond to be able to be that powerful and that special to an individual.
Yeah, so some of the tools that they had reported that they used within the coaching process was the Enneagram, actually. So all the coaches that had referred their clients to me to be participants were all integrative coaches, and they had used the Enneagram with their clients in the coaching process. So the Enneagram is a personality tool that has 9 different styles. And once you figure out your style, you understand what your core motivations are, and that helps you to understand why you behave the way you do. So that was one specific tool that almost all of them reported on that was very useful for them. Another tool was also the visual aids. So visualization exercises, one could imagine herself standing tall as an old oak tree, making sure that no matter what hits her, she will still stand there and be resilient to get through any situation. Other tools were like journaling. I think journaling is a great tool for reflection, definitely after coaching sessions and in between coaching sessions, just to write down what it was that was learned along the way, what else do they need to do differently next time, and what didn't work. In any situation, I think always look at what worked well, what didn't work well, and how can we do it differently the next time.
All of these tools, I think, are definitely very valuable and ones that a lot of coaches are familiar with or have probably utilized at some point in their career with their clients. I know within your research, you also have somewhat of a suggested model, the AAA model that was developed off of your work with self-leadership. Could you share a little bit more about that model and the purposes you see for it?
Okay, so I think many coaches use a coaching model during their coaching sessions. Maybe they've created one during their coach training, or the most popular one that we know of is Whitmore's GROW model. So as part of my study, I created the AAA model, and that incorporates the 3 self-leadership strategies that are outlined by the leading self-leadership researchers. And the first A stands for AIM, the second A for actuality, and the third A for action. And it's very similar to the GROW model, where clients can create a goal, they go deeper into their current reality, and then they work on action steps to move to their desired reality.
With this model, the 3 steps being aim, actuality, and action, when being utilized theoretically, how would that look in a coaching dynamic or coaching conversation?
Okay, so it's still a very new model, and there's lots of room for development and to be able to test it in a real coaching setting. But the idea with the model is that even though it's flexible and easy to adapt, it's to encourage coaches to give more attention to the self-leadership strategies when working with clients. And perhaps this is already being done in many ways, but maybe there are some that we don't really know of. So it's just to create that awareness. So let's see if I can break down this AAA model for you, right? Most coaching models begin with a goal or a purpose. So when we meet our clients, we'll ask, so what would you like to focus on for the session? Or what do you want to walk away from the session? And this involves then identifying what is the aim or the goal at the outset of the coaching session, right? The coach then partners with the client to ensure that whatever the client needs at that time and that goal that they have is what they would like to work on. And sometimes the goal changes during the session, that it happens. But anyway, coaches can just recontract around the new goal and continue with the session. Now, since self-leadership focuses more on the what and the why of a task, I think this is an important time also for coaches to ask the question about why is this goal important to you? What meaning does it have for you? So that's the aim phase of it. During the actuality phase, coaches can encourage their clients to observe their own behavior. Coaches ask certain questions that will examine their thoughts and also just see what sort of language are they using with themselves. How are they talking to themselves? And even when they talk to us as coaches, what sort of language are they using? So coaches can use different tools to improve the self-leadership skills of clients. And I mentioned the one tool, mental imagery. Those visualizations can be quite useful for clients in this particular phase. And that falls under one of the self-leadership strategies in any case. And then the last one is the action phase, which is very similar to the W phase of the GROW model. And that looks at creating an action plan, which the coachee will then move forward with. If a client wants to commit to meditating every day, let's just say that, right? The coach can ask additional questions about how is the client going to incorporate pleasant aspects into this task? What's going to make them want to take action? Or what needs to happen to make sure they take the action? And what will happen if they don't take the action? Will there be a punishment? And that talks to that self-punishment part of the behavior-focused strategy. And lastly, how will they reward themselves once they've taken the action? So essentially, more time is spent in this final phase to ensure that clients are feeling more motivated and they're going to actually go out and do what they have committed to doing.
Yeah, and I also see an interesting relationship between the first and the third. So aim and action, if their goal was to meditate more often and they end up not doing that, they are no longer engaging with the behavior that was theoretically their original goal that provides feedback to suggest to the coach and the client, well, maybe their goal should change. Maybe the initial goal that they made is one that is not something that they're actually looking to action on.
Absolutely. And I think often the goals do change. It's just a matter of recontracting with the client and moving on to the next one.
Within the self-leadership model, what are maybe some of the things that you found that can be challenges for individuals? And what are good ways then if an individual is having issues with leading themselves, what are some ways that they can get back on track or recenter and ground themselves in a positively focused self-leadership?
I think, we can't really do anything if we don't know that it exists. So when I was interviewing the participants, a few of them told me that they had never heard of self-leadership before. One even said that she had to Google this before our interview. And another mentioned that she didn't realize there was an actual term for it. So she knew about self-leadership, but she didn't really know that there was this term for it. So I think clearly there needs to be more awareness around self-leadership, as well as a clearer distinction between self-management and self-leadership, because most people also possibly think that self-management is the same as self-leadership, but there is that distinction, right? So that certainly is one barrier to people not practicing self-leadership. Okay, another possible blocker is also personality. So as I mentioned, I work with the Enneagram, and I've noticed that certain personality types are they're just more driven and goal-orientated because of their core motivations. In reality, any personality type can be disciplined and practice self-leadership, especially when they're operating from a healthy space. But when they are at an unhealthy space, that's when the personality can become a blocker and they don't feel as motivated to go out and achieve what they need to. And I think lastly, there's also a simple lack of discipline. Sometimes people just get in their own way. They don't have consistency, or sometimes their desire to take the harder route is just not working for them. So they slip back into the old habits and stay stuck there. So lack of discipline can also be a barrier to self-leadership.
One other question I have then would be, as you have done this dissertation, do you have any inklings of wanting to do additional research, or in the space in the research field of self-leadership, are there some next steps you think could be important to be investigated?
I would like to do some further research and maybe do a PhD. I'm not sure if it's definitely going to be in the field of self-leadership. I think there is still a lot of work that can be done within this space. My study focused purely on how coaching can help people develop those self-leadership skills that were described by those 3 strategies. Other researchers could possibly look at other parts of self-leadership. Maybe there's more to it. I think even if you just look at emotional intelligence, which is not necessarily part of these 3 strategies, how that influences people. And there are also these psychometrically sound self-leadership questionnaires that can be used before and after a coaching program to measure how effective coaching really is. And that was something I didn't use within my research, but it's definitely another way to really measure the effectiveness of self-leadership through this coaching process. Self-leadership is a skill that everyone should learn, no matter what field they're in. And the good news is that it is learnable. You don't have to be born with it. So traditionally, these skills were learned through training programs. And now some of the leadership programs are adding coaching into this mix, right? So it would be interesting to see how combining training and coaching can strengthen self-leadership even more. And here again, maybe the use of a self-leadership questionnaire before and after that would be great to measure that impact. The other thing as well is that my study focused on individual coaching. It doesn't take into account how team or group coaching can contribute to self-leadership. So employees who are part of a team or group are able to learn from each other during these group coaching sessions. I think, it's obvious that they are able to learn. So perhaps there's a space there for some research to see whether team or group coaching will contribute to self-leadership.
Yeah, I imagine the social learning theory could have a unique and interesting interplay in the group coaching scenario that you wouldn't necessarily see in the one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today and sharing your knowledge. Hopefully, we have people learning a little bit more about self-leadership, and maybe we'll even hear about individuals testing out the AAA model as well. How could people get in contact with you, follow along with what you're up to?
So to contact me, you can always just check out my website. My company is Kulba. I'll have to spell that for you. It's KHULBHA. So you can visit me on www.kulba.com, or you can also email me at kavita@kulba.com. You'll also find me on LinkedIn. You can just search for my name, Kavita Govindjee, and you'll be able to connect with me there.
And we'll make sure to get your website and your LinkedIn linked in our show notes. So for anyone listening, you can find those attached to this episode. But Kavita, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. It's been such a pleasure getting to talk with you and get to learn more about self-leadership with you today.
Thank you, Austin. It's really been a privilege to be able to be here and to speak about my research and to share what I have found from this process, and also just what I've learned throughout this research process of while I was doing my master's. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, thank you so much. We will see you on the next episode of Coaching Revealed.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Coaching Revealed, brought to you by the Institute of Coaching. You can learn more about the Institute on our website at instituteofcoaching.org. You can stay up to date with new episodes of our podcast by liking and following Coaching Revealed. You can also find us on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X with the handle Institute of Coaching. We also love hearing from our guests, so please reach out to us with thoughts you have on this episode and any questions you have about coaching. Until next time, this is Emily Tarani with Coaching Revealed.